Welcome everybody. My name is Brooks. I serve as a pastor here at Newbreak Church. If I haven't met you, I'm so glad that you're here. One of my jobs is to help oversee and lead our care team. And our care team is a ministry of volunteers whose main focus is to offer spiritual and emotional support to our church community. And so one thing that we are doing as a team is thinking about how can we equip our care team, but also invite and equip other people to care for the spiritual emotional needs of our community and both here at Newbreak but also our community at large. So we came up with this idea of Care Team Presents. And so we've now done several of these, and today's topic is the Care Team Presents Understanding and Caring for People with Addiction. And so it's a topic that is very practical. It's something that all of us face. Whether ourselves individually or friends and family members, we've been impacted by addiction. And so our goal is always to help educate as well as equip us as a community to walk alongside and understand and care for people who are battling addiction. So we are blessed today to have our special guest speaker, which I'll introduce him here in a few moments. But first, if you can you flip your packet over? Just go straight to the back. And on the back of this packet is 2 QR codes. We have, like I mentioned, we have a care team. And if you have a care need, or you know someone that has a care need, whether you're a life group leader, you're someone at a church community, and you feel like there's a need that is presented to you, well, I would encourage you to direct them to the care team request for care. This is a QR to it. I think also if you were just to do the short code for it, it's newbreak.church/care, and you should be able to fill that out. When you go to this web page, you can submit a form, and the form has different options for you to choose from. So whether you need prayer, you need a therapy referral, maybe you need some benevolence help, or you know someone who does. Maybe you need someone to go visit someone in the hospital or go visit someone at home, or you're looking for someone to walk with you from offering one-to-one care. That's all there on that form. So I wanted to highlight that. And then also, if you are interested in being a part of our care team, maybe you have a heart to serve in a capacity to walk alongside people in a difficult moment, you can scan the QR code and fill out an application, and then we will get back to you and train you to be on the care team we have a care team at each one of our campuses. I just want to take a quick moment and thank our care team leads who were here setting up early and who help volunteer their time to provide oversight of our care team. So I believe that we have Cindy, who's our care team lead at Ocean Beach. I know where Cindy's at. Thank you, Cindy. Yes, Roxanne, and Roxanne, who's here, she's over there. Yes, thank you, Roxanne. Roxanne and Laureen Pena are here at Tiercena, and then Ashley and Lauren are at Scripps Ranch. So Ashley is in the back. Way to go, Ashley. Okay. Well, with all that being said, the goal of today is to have a time of learning and growing. We are going to have a Q&A at the end. So my request would be to hold your questions till the end, write them down, make a note of them. We should have about 30 minutes of questions where we can ask questions of our speaker for today. So why don't we pray, and then I will introduce our speaker to go ahead and lead us in this conversation. So would you join me in prayer? Lord, we come to you to try to grow, Lord. We come to you to look for hope, Lord. We come looking for your guidance and direction and your love, Lord. We thank you for this group of people who are here hungry to learn and understand and grow. And how can we walk with people? How can we understand what people are going through? How can we come alongside them in their difficult times, Lord, and be able to support them? We pray that you would use this time to teach us and grow us and stretch us, Lord, so that you might use us, Lord, to be able to care for those who are in need. Help our speaker, Kevin, to feel totally at peace and be able to share from his experience and his insights, Lord, so that we might all look more and more like your Son, Jesus Christ, in this process, Lord. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I would like to introduce to you Kevin. I know him as Kevin. He's on our care team. Kevin approached us about a year ago and said, if you would like to do this particular topic, I feel like I am a great candidate to teach it. And so I said, yes, Kevin, you're the guy. Yes. So let's go to welcome Kevin up, and he'll talk about himself.
All right. Thank you, Brooks.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for the welcome. So anyway, essentially what we're going to cover today is fairly predictable. It's ultimately me telling you a little bit about my story, telling you about the nature of addiction, about relapse, about treatment, and how we as a church can respond to people who are in the throes of addiction. So just real quick, I myself, it may be evident, but I was born in 61 and I'm 64 years old at this point. And I feel like a lot has changed over the years with regard to the public's awareness and treatment of addiction as an issue. There was a time when I was a young man or just a young soul in general, where addiction was whispered about. Things like AA and Narcotics Anonymous were not widely known and not widely participated in. People didn't frequently speak about their struggles with addiction and in public, and that has changed. I feel like people are more comfortable speaking about it. People are more aware of the possibility that addiction is present, and they're more aware of what the solutions might be if they or someone they care about has an issue. And so I feel like that's something that's changed dramatically. There's movies that are out that deal with the topic of treatment and addiction and things of that sort. And I feel like a lot of them are actually pretty valuable and helpful in getting some insight into what that looks like. So I have a personal journey with addiction, and I'm not going to get into the details excessively, but it came a point in 2015 where I found myself at a crossroads. Some people would call it a bottom. And basically a bottom is that place where you've discovered that so many things have gone bad, you've finally come to terms with the idea that you probably need to quit. And so I found myself at that point in 2015. By the way, it's October 19th, 2015, or about 2 weeks from now. Thank you. We'll be at 10 years. So at any rate, that's where it started for me. And what I thought I was going to be doing is going to the Quit Drugs Club, and that was going to be basically the solution. Like step 1, stop. Step 2, keep stopping. Step 3, don't do that anymore. And things of this nature. And of course, what I discovered was it wasn't that at all. What it was is the Life Transformation Club, where getting rid of your addiction was the primary emphasis. And so during that time, I found my life transformed. I found myself, I was already a believer, and my walk with Christ became much better. I felt like the 12-step program was almost like a discipleship program, and how it helped me and how it benefited me was amazing, and once again, transformational. So I saw other people come in to these rooms, some of them would come in and out. That was not uncommon, and it's still common today. And so when I saw somebody come in, I tried to help them. I tried to assist them, tried to make them feel comfortable, because it's awkward to walk into wherever that might be, the church basement with a bunch of strangers, and start to bare your soul. And so I found myself working with others and seeing their lives transformed. And that was a beautiful process, and that led me to the decision that one day I would like to be able to do this for a living. And so it's kind of fascinating, just that journey of quitting itself. So many people believe this is going to be an issue of willpower, that I'm just going to simply one day decide I can do this, and then it's going to be done. And like so many things that are God-driven, it's the opposite. It seems that we get more when we give more, and things of this sort that's in God's economy differ from our normal life experiences. And so it is with this battle, surrender. Surrender is how I won. But it wasn't just surrender like, oh God, whatever. I can't do this anymore, just make a decision for me. But it was more about finding a way to let God guide me, with the principles of the program that I was a part of to guide me, and for other individuals that had already gone before me and had some awareness of what to do to guide me. My thinking had not been stellar. I had made enough mistakes and had enough problems, and that's not an uncommon situation. And I found that I needed something else to take charge and to give me direction in my life. So it is kind of interesting. Most of the people that I work with, I work as a treatment counselor, addiction counselor in a treatment setting. Most everybody that's in that setting has had a past problem with addiction. And each of us has come out on the other side where we're finding that these things that would be ordinarily thought of as scars, we can wear almost like badges. Like, look what I've been through and look how I've come out. And it's a great thing, and it's a beautiful thing. But it's really weird filling out your resume and bragging about all your problems. You know, like most resumes, you want to lie, right? Not that I would. You're like, I really had 7 DUIs. No. So you don't want to go that route, but nonetheless, it is fascinating. It really actually bodes well when working with other individuals with addiction to have had problems and come out on the other side successful and have some sense of what that journey looks like. So, as was previously noted, my role is as a treatment counselor. I work with Right Path Recovery. We're a treatment center. 98% of the people that come through our door have insurance. And so that typically represents people who are over 18 and under 26 because they're still on mom and dad's insurance, or those people who have a job where insurance is taking care of their treatment. And those people will come, and their initial stay with us will be in a residential setting and detoxification. There's so many different drugs that are very dangerous to detox from on your own, and so we make that a comfortable process for an individual. Alcohol is particularly dangerous, but there are certainly others where it is so incredibly uncomfortable that it's unlikely that someone's going to put up with 10 days of withdrawal on their own without help from any other sources. And so we provide medications. Oops, that was destined to happen. So we provide medications by medical professionals to help them through those moments. I happen to work at the next level of care, which they consider a lower level of care, which is intensive outpatient and partial hospitalization programs. And so those are individuals that have more freedoms. They're able, unlike the first 30 days, to have their cell phones back, have access to laptops, to have more ability to come and go as they wish. They're still monitored by our staff, but ultimately there's more freedom. And what I do is I provide group facilitation. That can be instructional. That can be just exchanges of ideas, feelings, etc., particularly around the topic of addiction, but also other things, sometimes life skills, anger management, things of this nature that are things that the addict is facing on a regular basis. And during the time that they're with us, I think it's worthy of bringing up, they have access to a case manager. And that individual, well, let's be honest, when a person's life comes crumbling down, oftentimes there's a lot of attributes that are messy. It could be economics, it could be relationship, it could be legal issues, it could be physical health issues. And so while they're with us, oftentimes they're distracted by the desire to take care of those things. And so we help them take care of those things without exiting treatment. Because as long as they can stay with us, as long as they have a period of time where they can stay sober, the odds of their success is improved. And so we want to help them through those processes while they're with us. Okay, good. We have the slide I was hoping to have up there. You can see on there I have a contact email and a phone number. And I'm going to say, basically, in the course of my becoming, going through recovery, or I'm still in recovery, I found that sharing my number with other individuals was helpful for them, but it's also quite honestly helpful for me. So you'll have that in your handouts. It's in really small font. But that being said, if you ever wish to talk about an issue or otherwise or get a referral to sources of help, please text me and I'll be happy to respond and help you in any way that I can. And I think that would be true of other individuals that are in the recovery community as well. We have a heart to help, and oddly enough, once again, in that God economy sort of way, when we help others, it typically really helps us. And so it's one of the beautiful benefits of being in the job that I am. So let's go to the next slide if we could, please. Thank you. So it's an important issue, and part of the reason it's an important issue is because it impacts so many people. We see up there that people with alcohol use disorder, 27 to 29 million people, roughly 10% of the population, has some level of alcohol use disorder, more commonly called alcoholism. That can be a mild, moderate, or severe level, but anyway, it's some level or another. Then along with that, drug use disorder, or basically drug addiction, is 9.7%. Well, let's just round it up roughly to 10% for sake of simplicity. So you have two groups, alcohol use disorder and drug use disorder, each coming close to 10% of the population. In other words, roughly 20% of the population has an issue of some sort. I think that's pretty tremendously large. It's amazing. Out of every 5 people, somebody has an issue of some kind. And maybe somebody in your family, maybe a near relative, maybe somebody you go to school with, maybe somebody you work with. Maybe you've been fortunate enough to have the family that doesn't have issues and have avoided most problems. And then you're sitting at a stoplight and you get rear-ended by somebody else who does have an issue. So it does tend to impact us in a variety of ways, whether it's in your school, workplace, home, or even just in public in general. So that's an awful lot of people that have different issues. And that's one of the reasons we consider it valuable. So of the people who have an addiction issue, roughly 20% get treatment any given year. So the remaining 80% don't get treatment. I've heard people say in the past, this is something of a tragedy. There's 80% of people not getting treatment. And I would understand that if it was diabetes or cancer or otherwise, that makes a lot of sense that that would be something of a tragedy. But it's difficult, and I'm sure some of you are aware of this, to get addicts to pursue recovery. The nature of addiction itself is that people will hang on to this condition and fight tooth and nail to not take on treatment or take on sobriety. And so I wrote at the top, you can lead an addict to treatment, but you can't make them recover. And I'm sure maybe you folks are familiar with, or at least I'll just tell you I'm familiar with, situations where somebody gets a DUI and they're required to go to certain groups and so forth, and it has very little impact on their lives. Or they go to jail, or they go other places where they're required to by the courts, or they're in the process of wanting to get their children back, and they commit to being in some form of program in order to have that facilitated, and their heart isn't really actually in it. Underneath it all, they're still very much an addict, and they very much will be acting upon that, and that's just the nature of the disease. So we had somebody write this up in assistance with me, and I love what they wrote. It's basically, addiction is a chronic relapsing brain condition characterized by compulsive substance seeking and behavioral engagement. So basically, someone's thinking about it all the time or acting upon it all the time, or so it would seem. It's a complex disease, and it involves interactions between genetics, brain circuits, environment, and life experiences. What you and I see is the behavior. We see individuals who are constantly in drug-seeking behavior, or in some way, shape, or form finding the resources in order to obtain more drugs or alcohol. So there is a manual called the DSM-5, and how many of you have actually heard of that? Oh, wow, that's quite a few. It's written by the American Psychiatric Association, and it lists many different mental health issues. And in there, it will take anything, anxiety, various forms of depression, ADHD, any number of mental health issues, and break down what sort of criteria does a person have to demonstrate in order to have this condition. And it's handy for practitioners, mental health practitioners, to look down a list and say, I can say with some definitive certainty that this person has this disorder. And so they've done that for addiction. And they wrote up effectively 11 questions that a person should be asked who may have an addiction issue. We'll go through them one at a time. And what would be helpful is if you keep track for yourself of how many times you say yes to any one of these, or think back to when you were actively addicted and how many times you would have said yes. So the first one, taking the substance in larger amounts or for longer than you meant to. Second one, wanting to cut down or stop using the substance but not managing to. Spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from use of the substance, craving and urges to use the substance, not managing to do what you should at work, home, or school because of substance use, continuing to use even when it causes problems in relationships. Giving up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of substance use. Using substances again and again, even when it puts you in danger. Continuing to use even when you know you have a physical or psychological problem that could have been caused or made worse by the substance. Needing more of the substance to get the effect that you want, also known as tolerance. And lastly, development of withdrawal symptoms, which can be relieved by taking more of the substance. I've found for myself that that's a pretty good list, and that the people that I work with respond really well. It can be an eye-opening moment for the folks that I'm working with as they read through those, and they're answering 10 or 11 out of 11 in the affirmative to confirm that they do have a substance use disorder. But in the course of the DSM-5, they've indicated that a mild substance use disorder would be 2 to 3 of those affirmative. 4 to 5 is moderate, and 6 or more is severe. Once again, that's, I think, a helpful guide, and like I said, the folks that I'm working with quite frequently have every single one of those checked off in the affirmative. So there was one other attribute, and I'm glad this is up there and available for us, that seems to be present in an addict that is characterized. It's almost like it could be a great 12th question. But it is, in addition to those things, denial. And denial, it shows up as minimizing, rationalizing, or outright rejecting evidence that drinking or drug use is harmful. And you can see that in so many instances where an individual can have a life that's clearly in trouble in a variety of ways and still indicate this isn't a problem, or I don't care that it's a problem, or it's only my problem, it's not your problem, don't worry about it. And the responses seem to come out in that fashion. But it also can show up in a way in sobriety for individuals who are still impacted by the disease of addiction. And the way it shows up for those folks is, I'll just use one time and it won't be a problem. I think I've outgrown this addiction thing, I'm probably okay. My wife will be gone for the weekend, I'll just do it once, you know. However that may look, individuals will lie to themselves, or that voice of addiction within them will lie. And that's a super common thing, is that it seems that the voice of addiction is the voice of a liar. That sort of sounds familiar. So anyway, if we can go to the next slide, please. Addiction itself, we call it a disease. And when I first heard of it being referred to as a disease, I kind of scoffed, and maybe you are as well. I thought, it's a habit, it's a behavior, it's a variety of things. But when they isolate what actually really happens in an individual, it fits into what would be called a disease model. And so in the disease model, you need to have certain things, and I may not say this perfectly, but ultimately you need an organ that is impacted, a defect that is present, and expressed in that fashion. And in this case, the organ is the brain. And the primary part of it that's reacting for an addict, unlike other individuals, is the midbrain. And we see here in this diagram a neuron. And in that little gap right there is the synapse. And that's where dopamine will flow as a neurotransmitter. And dopamine is that feel-good substance. When you do something fantastic, when you go on vacation, when you're just having a good day, dopamine is flowing. And we find that taking place in our lives on a regular basis. In fact, what would life be without some joy, some pleasure? And so this is one way in which the brain is expressing that for us, or that's being expressed in our brain for us. And let's just go to the next slide if we could, please. So what's interesting is that for a person that is not an addict, the impact is not taking place in the midbrain. We talked about there being 1 in 5 people that's showing up as an addict to either alcohol or drugs. But for the individual who is, still imbibing, still using and so forth, and doesn't become an addict, it's because they're not experiencing this dysfunction in the midbrain where the dopamine flow is so great that it overpowers all other experiences. So I'll just read this off to some extent. The condition is a dysregulation of the pleasure system, or reward system as it's also known, due to very high levels of dopamine. It doesn't affect the midbrain for non-addicts, it does so for addicts, and they change the pleasure threshold. And ultimately the addict becomes fixated on the activities of obtaining and utilizing the drugs. So if we go to the next screen, I think this makes it a little bit more evident. Here you just see how dopamine impacts expresses itself in your brain on a regular basis, day in and day out. Pleasures like food, video game, intimacy with a partner, they register, and they register high, with a baseline being 100%. But look where cocaine, amphetamine, and methamphetamine are. They're huge. They so outweigh what would normally be the greater pleasures in life that you can see how a person would respond in the way that they do. Let me just take a quick look here. So, addicts will often get into a conversation with a loved one, and it might sound a little bit like this. Do you love me, or do you love alcohol? Do you love me, or do you love cocaine? And the addict who's using the front part of their brain is answering this question and saying, I love you more. But their behavior and the way in which the dopamine shows up, their motivation to continue using and seeking out that substance is present. And what's fascinating at some level is the midbrain is primarily a survival part of the brain. It isn't an area of the brain where conscious decisions are made in the same way that it is in the frontal cortex. It's more like survival. And it's and weighing out moral consequences, picking out a 401k, finding a new car, choosing a home to live in, that's not the function of the midbrain. The midbrain is survival. And so when the dysregulation takes place in the midbrain, the individual experiencing that is going to feel like they're going to simply die without this substance. And so in the addict's defense, while they say they love an individual, and they really do, they're experiencing a condition that they cannot overcome. It is just simply overpowering to have that level of dopamine taking place in their brain, and it basically hijacks the pleasure system and impacts individuals. So I think this is kind of an obvious answer, but you don't get addicted to things you don't ever use, right? I may have a problem with ketamine, but I wouldn't know because I've never used it. I may have a problem with a lot of other substances, but I don't know because I've never used it. A person does, in fact, make choices more often than not to try something. But like I said, out of 10 people, 2 in 10 are becoming addicted. And so it's like other people are making these choices and not becoming addicted. And so that is that dysregulation. And so a person simply needs to be exposed to a substance, in some cases be exposed repeatedly in order to become an addict. So something like alcohol, for instance, is going to more typically be somebody may have to be drinking for a number of years before they find themselves becoming what we might call an alcoholic. Whereas somebody using methamphetamine might use it on Friday, and by Sunday they're engaged in drug-seeking behaviors. Just because of the power of that drug and its ability to impact the midbrain of just about everybody who uses it. So quite simply, people need to use it in order to become addicted, most typically. Things that increase the odds of becoming an addict. First of all, I love that we're doing these presentations. We had one on trauma. We had one on grief. And trauma is one of the things that is a likelihood and a precursor to potentially becoming an addict. People who've experienced trauma, they're hurt, and they want relief from that hurt, and sometimes substances provide that relief. Is it the best answer? No, but it is an answer, and it is a way to numb and to not experience the pain that comes emotionally associated with different issues. What's kind of ironic is if you use drugs and alcohol long enough, you also increase the odds of experiencing trauma because of different activities that you're engaged in. But I digress. So another thing that contributes to it is culture or family environment. If you're a part of a community where drug and alcohol use is extremely common, then the odds of a person becoming an alcoholic or addict are greater. And if you're raised in a household where these things are commonly done, then your odds are also increased. And that just makes sense at some level. When it's right around you all the time, it's going to be something that's more likely for a person to pick up, use, and witness behavior that gets copied. But there's also the component of genetics. Now, I don't know that they've isolated the gene that might contribute to addiction, but it appears to be present. And it's kind of one of those things where a person could argue with me and say, well, if a person's raised in a household and mom and dad are both addicts, is it their culture or is it their genetics? And I think that's a valid question to raise. But what about the individual who was born to addicts and is put up for adoption and raised by other people? And what we find is that that individual, having those genetic components, tends to become an addict apart from being raised in an environment where it's taking place. So by whatever means is taking place, it appears that genetics contributes to it. Individuals will often self-medicate. An individual might experience depression, anxiety, once again, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, any other sorts of things that are making their life extraordinarily uncomfortable, and they may find that substances provide some relief. It might be temporary relief, it may be no relief at all, but they ultimately will find themselves sometimes getting addicted as a result of that use. And similarly, rather than self-medication, there's those medications that your doctor will provide. And there's been some where it's just simply gone off the rails, where the pain medications that are being prescribed by doctors become something that are so powerful and form addictions in individuals. And we saw that take place in a variety of ways. Today, Adderall is still one of those sorts of substances where it can be prescribed to an individual for ADHD or for some other benefit, and they can find themselves in drug-seeking behavior as a result of that prescription. So we kind of talked a little bit about the ways in which people become addicted, some of the things that increase the odds of becoming addicted. We should probably turn the corner and talk about recovery. So we just have abstinence versus recovery. Abstinence is pretty straightforward. I think it barely needs explanation, but let's do it anyway. Abstinence is just the foregoing of something that you could have had. You don't say of your 7-year-old, they've been abstinent for alcohol from 7 years now. Good job, you know. No, it's something that you could have taken. And, people will give up things for Lent or otherwise, and that's sort of a form of an abstinence. But truly, abstinence is a valuable part of recovery, but it itself is not recovery. And so we're pleased when people become abstinent, but a lot of times people will say, that's all I need to do. And their logic is pretty good if you think about it. I had all my problems as a result of alcohol, and if I stop the alcohol, no problems, right? And that seems like a valid point, but it doesn't seem to really work out that way. There seems to be something that's needed on the other side in the realm of growth and healing. And for me in particular, I believe in a spiritual transformation being necessary as well. And thank goodness I'm in a crowd that maybe agrees. So, but a question that's often asked is, how long does it take to recover? And there's really no great answer, if I'm being perfectly honest. For somebody who's maybe like relatively young, has not been using for a very long period of time, or actually maybe not so much really young, was a late bloomer, started using at 25 and says at 28 I have a problem. The brain was fully developed and they're able to engage in recovery in a positive way, then their period of time might be less than another individual's. But right now, for example, I have a person who I'm working with who is in her late 60s, and she's only had 10 years of her life where she hasn't been a substance user. and she's going to be a difficult person for recovery. She's going to have a longer period of time. And there's different components to what that looks like. There's your physical recovery, your mental health recovery, and emotional and frankly, spiritual recovery. Those sorts of things take time. And when behaviors get ingrained over a course of a number of years, it's also hard to get away from those. If your solution was always to turn to a substance, and then I say, go get them, you don't have anything that you used to have, you're going to need tools, you're going to need methods, you're going to need practice, you're going to need support in order to be able to do those things. So the short answer is it could be a relatively brief period of time that a person needs to recover, and it could frankly be years. There's different ways to find treatment or recover, and all you have to do is ask people what they did, and you will eventually bump across somebody who says, I just did it on my own. And so what I wrote is the first one, by oneself without assistance. And I don't personally advocate that, but I include it because you will eventually hear somebody say it. And we hear great stories. It's not uncommon. A lady is about to give birth to a child, says, I'm going to stop. And then it's going to be, I'm going to stay stopped because I want this child to experience a positive household. And that's fantastic. The real realm of recovery may or may not be taking place in the best possible way. But first of all, abstinence is the bedrock of recovery. And if a person has that, other things are possible. And so we list it there. But once again, I would not advocate it as a best method to anyone. Then there's 12-step meetings and other recovery support groups. These typically take place at no charge. So you could go to Celebrate Recovery, you could go to AA, you can go to Narcotics Anonymous. There's apparently over 400 groups with A in their title. There's Crystal Meth Anonymous, there's Heroin Anonymous, there's Cocaine Anonymous, there's Marijuana Anonymous. And of course, there's Gamblers Anonymous and other things. I mostly just focus on substances, so just keep in mind that these principles are applied to a number of other things that could be potentially problematic. But 12-step meetings are fantastic, and it's how I obtained recovery. The principles of the program help people in their lives, help them to rebuild, and they get the support they need. Many of you are loving and supportive individuals, and I think it's so fantastic that you're here. What an addict often needs is another addict to talk to. And I've heard it too many times, even from addicts themselves. They'll say, sure, that person has a PhD behind their name or an MD behind their name, but I want to talk to another person who's actually been through the process of quitting a substance and going through it and figuring out how to come out on the other side and has a real lived experience. And so that's one of the things that they're going to get when they go to a 12-step meeting or another recovery support group, and they can be fantastic. There are shortcomings and there's positives to everything. And I work at a treatment center, and I'm not going to tell you, oh my gosh, the only thing a person should do or can do is go to a treatment center, because there are options, and that is not the answer for everyone. One of the things about treatment centers, first of all, they can be paid for by insurance like the one I go to. Now, people can come out of pocket, but it is $6,500 a day for detoxification for a 7-day period. It is $5,500 a day for residential, and by the end of 30 days, you're up to close to $150,000. Yeah, you wonder why your insurance bill's high. So nonetheless, but there are expenses associated with the work that we do, and I'm surprised that we don't make more profit. We really actually, surprisingly, are struggling as an organization. So that being said, they're expensive, and we typically see the people that come to us paid by insurance. There's independent organizations. There was a place for years that was advertised, Passages of Malibu, and they would advertise on television, and they're really quite expensive, and they don't take insurance, and you just need to be wealthy. That's pretty much it. There's governmental organizations, and by that I mean there would be places that would just take California state insurance, health insurance, and then there's other ones that are like faith-based organizations. That would be like the Salvation Army. And then I put in a separate category for also another faith-based organization, and that I called in a different term, and it may or may not be the most perfect terminology for it, residential treatment centers, and an example would be Teen Challenge. Very good, me too. They're fantastic. Not everybody can commit to what they have, but for the person who can, they're fantastic. And the typical person who goes to Teen Challenge will spend 12 months to 36 months in their presence. They are unashamed and unapologetic about holding Christ at the center, and that's a beautiful thing. A lot of the people that will come out on the other side are trained for ministry in the course of their being there, and or at least if nothing else, trained to continue on with the program and help other people that are coming in. Because of the duration of the program, because of the way in which they put faith at the center of it, they have an incredibly high success rate for those who complete the program. And I wish I could say we had the same for us, but it's a little bit different set of circumstances. Now, if I understand correctly, one of the things they do is that they do their funding through donations and through thrift store sales and things of that sort. So I don't believe they even charge individuals who are going to do this. But if I'm also being perfectly honest with you, there's a number of people who are trying to obtain recovery, and you would think based on their lives and the way their lives had gone, they'd be like, wow, I really want to do this. I don't care what it takes. But then you say, oh, you have to believe in God. And you're like, I'm out. I'm back to fentanyl. You know, and it's absolutely remarkable how often we kind of see that response. And so in the course of what I do, we sort of gently put upon them the idea that a higher power, God, or other entity should serve in their life as a means of obtaining principles, guidance, love, understanding, forgiveness, and the things that we would hope they would get. And I've seen people turned around and had their lives lead in a positive way by just starting off gently. So my point is quite simply that something like Teen Challenge, as great as it is, might be a hard sell for certain individuals who are not already committed to Christ. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the treatment center environment. One of the things we do is we obviously create a drug-free environment. Now, if a person's going to a 12-step program, they aren't going to get that, quite honestly. That's not, once again, everything has benefits, and there's more than one side to all of this, but we're going to create an environment where a person really quite cannot simply leave the facility. They're going to be with us for 30 days. They're going to be protected. When they have an urge, a desire, a craving, they're not going to be able to act upon it as easily. And we're going to give them a place to safely detox. We're supportive with staff and other peers. Everybody's going through the same thing in the realm of the other patients or clients that have been there. But also, once again, most of the staff has been through recovery themselves, and so there's some benefit in that as we share principles of what's going to keep an individual in recovery and healthy and sober. It's from real lived experience. Once again, as mentioned, develop or improve a relationship with a higher power. We do talk in generalities with them, and we encourage them to have something that's greater than they are to believe in. And if you think about it, and I kind of brought it up before, my own best thinking in the throes of my addiction wasn't very good. If you gave me a choice of something disastrous or something productive, I typically pick disastrous. It's like I had a knack for it. But that being said, having a higher power allows somebody to get guidance from something with more wisdom than themselves. And so even in the context of these groups, and it may even sound a little sacrilegious, they would have GOD, a group of drunks, or group of druggies. Because if there was a group of other individuals that were going through recovery and had experienced positive things, there was some wisdom in them that they themselves do not have, and that's valid. I've heard other people say, my GOD is the great outdoors. Now, I know that doesn't acronym out quite perfectly, but nonetheless, the point of the matter is something that is greater than themselves that will give them guidance and principles in their lives is what we're looking for, and we try to guide them in doing that. And we also try to give them information on how to pursue recovery and improve their lives in general. So on this next slide is a dismal result, or what appears to be a really thoroughly dismal result. 20 to 30% of people remain clean and sober after 9 months, having attended a treatment center. But there's a little bit more nuanced information in there. Only 42% of people complete the program. And out of those 42% that complete the program, 70% remain clean and sober after 9 months. This speaks to a couple of things. One of which is maybe, is treatment of 30 days enough? Or are the programs that are being offered enough? But also it speaks to something else that I think may or may not be totally evident at this point. And that is that just simply addiction is incredibly powerful. It is incredibly powerful. And for those people who have been in the process of recovery, you maybe have gone to meetings, and somebody who had 10 years relapses, and you're like, what the heck happened? And that voice inside our heads just never stops chattering. Sometimes it just gets a little softer. And sometimes it comes back with a vengeance. And sometimes it hits us when we're down, and it creates what seems like a solution when in fact it's the worst possible decision that we could make. So that brings me to what I was just speaking of, effectively, is what is relapse? In the context of drug and alcohol use, it means that you've abstained for a period of time and that you've returned to drug use or alcohol use. A lot of times when a person's going to relapse, the evidence and information was already somewhat evident in their lives. I've spoken with far too many people and found out some people were knowing that they were going to relapse a year or two in advance. I know, hard to believe. And what it looked like was, I'm going through the motions, things are okay, but as soon as I have my chance, I'm going to do this thing. And it's a weird lingering thought that bounces around in the heads of addicts. But there's a number of things that can create circumstances in which relapse is much more likely. And just like those things that create a greater likelihood of addiction, they're not a given, but they're an increased possibility. And so I wrote here dopamine exposure. And that just sort of sounds vague or unusual all by itself. But what I'm speaking about is the individual had a problem with heroin, and they went to a picnic and they had a beer. They didn't have a problem with beer, alcohol, or otherwise, but because they have a spike in the dopamine reaction within their brain, all of a sudden they have an itch that only heroin can scratch. And it does seem that when an individual will use one substance, it can lead back to another. And that may be unusual. The one that's the most common these days that people seem to lean into is marijuana. They think, it's harmless, it's medicine, it's no big deal. By the way, there is a Marijuana Anonymous, and I'm very familiar with it. Bottom line is, somebody will give themselves permission. They said, I had a problem with alcohol, I'm just going to use marijuana. And they may find themselves using alcohol again, or they may find themselves addicted to marijuana. Now, is there an exception to everything? Sure, there's times when that doesn't result that way, but more often than not, it really does. And so that's what I mean by dopamine exposure, not like going bungee jumping or something else to that extent. Stress. If you talk to addicts long enough who've relapsed, you'll find out there was circumstances in their lives. And when we were speaking earlier, we talked about how an addict typically shows up at treatment or even on the doorsteps of a 12-step program, and their life has issues. It can be financial issues, health issues, relationship issues, legal issues. And just because they got sober doesn't mean the issues went away. Now they have to deal with them. You know, if you're in bankruptcy and you get sober, you're still in bankruptcy. If your spouse is talking about leaving you and you go get treatment, you still have a relationship that's difficult. And there's a lot of repair to do, and sometimes the dynamics change in sobriety such that it even increases the opportunity or possibility of divorce. So the point of the matter is stress can lead to relapse. As a person feels overwhelmed, in pain, they may turn to drugs or alcohol again as a form of release. There's something we would call drug-using cues. A more common term in society today would be triggers. Not my favorite word, I don't know why. But nonetheless, people, places, things, or situations in which they previously used, and they tend to bring about the desire to use again. Now, there's some actual neurotransmitters that are associated with that, which is unusual. Glutamate is one of these substances in the brain that makes note of where you got dopamine. And so glutamate kind of fires off and takes notes of places where you got dopamine, which is unusual sounding. But if you used to go to a certain bar all the time, you may get sensations when you go by that bar. Well, what is that? In terms of neurotransmitters, that's what's going on. You have a memory of positive dopamine experiences as a result of a certain location, certain people, certain places, situations, and even things. For some people, and I don't mean to sound unkind here, but just like a Corona bottle or something might trigger that sensation of desire. They may have some sort of memories associated around some given substance or objects, a syringe, a pipe, or otherwise. So people have to be careful about what they expose themselves to, and they need to develop those sorts of skills to A, avoid, or B, deal with it. And I don't say that lightly. It's not easy. And lastly, I wrote FOMO, just because I like to sound like a young kid. How did I do? At any rate, but the fear of missing out. And this is super common. Like I said, some of our clientele is under the age of 26 because they're on mom and dad's insurance. And when you talk to them about ongoing substance use, they will say things that would sound crazy to anybody else. Sure, I had a problem with passing out, had a problem with not eating, had a problem with blacking out, so forth, but I just can't imagine a life where if I got married, I couldn't have a glass of champagne, Or, I'm young, everybody I know is going out tonight, and they're going places. Why don't I get to go? Well, because you're an alcoholic, mostly. And one of the beautiful things about places like 12-step programs is, you want to go bowling tonight? You want to go to a party? You want to play volleyball? You want to go rock climbing? You want to go on a bike ride? There are groups where you can get together with other individuals who are sober, who will support you and have fun with you. And it's a positive thing. And so that hopefully takes away from some of the fear of missing out. But there's so many things that, once again, those triggers for relapse that are so associated with an event. Many people can't envision going to a barbecue without having some sort of drink in their hand. And so that association is so incredibly powerful, but it's something that people need to find a way to consume ribs without beer, It's hard, I know. So the ways to experience long-term recovery, whether you do this on your own, go to a 12-step program or go to some sort of treatment center, these are the things that we wrote down that I thought were the most powerful. And I'm sure there's more, but this is what we have to begin with. Obviously, once again, abstinence. Abstinence is the bare minimum for recovery. If you're not abstinent, you're not in recovery. By the way, I'll tell you a quick story. So I was a home inspector for about 7 years, or about 2,800 home inspections. And during that time, I remember going into a garage, and on the hood of this man's car was the AA book, and it was opened. And I thought, that's beautiful. But there was one small problem. There was a weed pipe with a half-burned bowl of weed sitting in the middle of his AA book. So despite the fact that he was on page 182, I would have to say he was not really actually in recovery. He was probably what some people call California sober, which is also known as not sober. Yeah. Okay, here's my really terrible joke. It sounds something like this. Recovery is awesome. All right, but that being said, the bottom line is that without abstinence, you're not in recovery. In addition, once again, we talked about how stress can take a person out, then a person needs to develop coping skills. That can be the avoidance of stressful situations. You can't avoid all of them, but avoid the ones that are unnecessary. Maybe there's dramatic people in your life that you don't need to have in your life or otherwise, or situations that you simply don't need to be a part of. But also there's going to be situations that do come up. Find ways to get through them. And once again, this is where our recovery community can be fantastic. Some people are so stressed by different events, and it's understandable. That letter from the Franchise Tax Board or the IRS is sitting there, and it can just leave some people paralyzed. And if they need somebody to talk to and give them a letter opener, then that could be some things that they could do. And once again, engage in means of stress relief, kind of right there along with coping skills, things that are useful to an individual. The social supports, I kind of mentioned it in the context of going out and finding entertainment, but also having somebody to talk to when things are difficult. If somebody has been through the circumstances that you're starting to go through and you can talk to them, it is such a relief. And it's a case of, well, once again, addicts tend to listen to other addicts who've been through the circumstances that they're going through, and they put great value in the solutions that they've found. Also, to maintain a safe and substance-free environment. Sometimes we have individuals who come to us, they're doing great, and we're ready to discharge them. Where are you going to live when you're done? I'm going to move back into my old situation where I have roommates that are active users, active drinkers, etc. And you just think the odds of your success just went down to almost zero. It's just a matter of time before your mind starts working and your proximity to these substances is going to take you back out. And so that's something else. And so if in fact it's flipped around and you have an individual who lives with you who's battling addiction, creating a substance-free environment for them is another way that you can support them. And then I've saved for last, the best for last, practice spirituality. We kind of talked a little bit about what that looks like, having a power greater than yourself. On this next slide, it talks about, well, what does that do for you? And I want to get to that in just a minute. Because I think I'd be making a mistake if I didn't reference what the Bible has to say about wine or alcohol and drugs. And I want to say that there is roughly 32, 33 different places in the Bible it speaks about wine, and never does it say, go get drunk. It basically, the most powerful and useful one of those that I found was, and do not get drunk with wine in which there is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. And if you think about it, it's like, don't be filled with that spirit, be filled with this Spirit. So, and that's pretty much a wonderful solution and a path of recovery all by itself. People sometimes wonder, is drug use mentioned in the Bible? And it is, but it's a little bit more nuanced. And pastors, if you want to correct me on this, you're more than welcome to. But the Greek word pharmakia is often translated witchcraft or sorcery, but you recognize the word pharmakia from pharmaceuticals and pharmacies. And so it was that in that day, amongst the other practices of witchcraft and sorcery, drug consumption was a part of it, or you can call them potions if you want to. So at any rate, so the Bible does speak about drug and alcohol use, and basically it's an admonition not to engage in it. But there's a value in spirituality, and we often say in the process that there's a spiritual solution to the addiction issue and to recovery itself. Once again, if you build a life around principles, and you're a person who's honest, is a person who follows through, is a person who's loving, is a person who's trustworthy, and all these other different lists of positive qualities, then you're a person who typically is going to be living a regret-free life. And I can't think of a place in the Bible where it encourages us to be anything but good people. So that in and of itself can be pursued with or without a Christian faith, but a person needs to be pursuing a life that is positive and regret-free, to be filled with purpose. Those of us who embrace Jesus and embrace the Christian faith have a life that has purpose. And a person who's recovering from addiction needs a life with purpose as well. To be open to prayer and miracles. It is just easy enough for me on any given Monday to turn to the people I'm working with and say, I'm sitting with living and breathing miracles. They can all just think back to 30 or 60 days previously when they thought there was no way out of their situation. And today, sitting sober is a miracle. And so I believe that a higher power, namely God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, can provide that for people. Once again, our God instructs us to love others, to love Him, but also to love ourselves. And that seems to be one of the biggest battles for addicts, is to love themselves, but also, one more down, forgiveness. I've met so many addicts for whom another individual forgives them, but they somehow hold themselves still at blame, and they still won't forgive themselves. And that's extremely common. And if a person can be forgiven by others, be forgiven by their Maker, then it seems like they should be able to forgive themselves. But still, for whatever reason, that seems to be a challenge. So, as was somewhat noted previously, for a lot of people, drugs and alcohol is a solution. It works. It doesn't work well, but it works. If you're wanting to be numb, it works. If you're not wanting to feel pain, it works. If you want to check out of life, if you want to just feel bliss without having earned or created anything positive, but just simply feel blissful, they can provide those sensations to an individual. But they tend not to work for very long, and they tend to bring so much destruction along with them that it's not a solution that works for any real duration. And so it is that spiritual solution that seems to make a difference for people. I do want to say one other thing on this note while we're here. I talked about people going it on their own, and I tried that. I had a very good cause for wanting to stop using substances, and I said, okay, enough. And it was a difficult path, but I ultimately did it, and it lasted about 4 years. I was going to church, and some rather stressful events took place in my life, but having God was a beautiful thing. But one of the things you get from being in a 12-step program is other people coming through the door who are going to remind you on a regular basis of what it's like to fail. You're going to have people who go out and relapse, and they're going to come back in, and you say, how was it? Was it fun? They're going to be like, no, it was miserable. It was terrible. I can't believe I did that. I'm such an idiot. You're like, thank you for doing that for me so I didn't have to. And although church and faith and everything else provides these beautiful, meaningful things in my life, it doesn't provide that moment. It doesn't provide that constant reminder that outside my door is an enemy of this nature. It may be that there's an enemy, but not necessarily of this nature. That's where we find it in programs, in meetings. And once again, I think we have out of this church a Celebrate Recovery that meets. I think they do an amazing job, and they know who God is. They know who the higher power is, and they talk about it freely and openly. And then you have maybe the best of both worlds, or of a supportive community, as well as faith. So there was ways in which our church can be helpful. First of all, you can pray. If there's individuals that are in your life that are struggling with addiction, you can pray for them. And I believe it makes a difference. You can pray with them. I believe it makes a difference. Number 2, environment. We talked about this earlier as well. There's a situation where if you can simply not be a source of temptation, or your home can be a drug or alcohol-free place, then that's something else you can provide to an individual who's trying to pursue recovery by not creating additional temptations for them. Resources. This is something where I was saying you can have my phone number and text me, or use my email, and I'll connect you with other resources. I'm not the only one. If there's 1 in 5 people who is an addict, there's certainly a lot of people who have also gone through recovery. So you're certainly welcome to reach out to me, but maybe you know other people that you're really comfortable with, that you enjoy talking to, and they can provide you with more information on how to get treatment, go to therapy. You can even contact our care team, which is a wonderful resource as well. And that's one more resource for you. If this is not your wheelhouse, so to speak, if this is not something you're extremely comfortable with, there are people who are dying to help. I would love to help, and most other people in recovery would love to help as well. Next, intervention. How many of you have seen that TV show, Intervention? Yeah, good job. It's such a train wreck. But it's a wonderful train wreck. It's a beautiful train wreck. They show the disaster of somebody's life, and they show a professional intervention. And a professional intervention has certain qualities to it that are powerful and meaningful. But I've met a lot of other people who have just had family members, workforce, other individuals intervene in their life. And it may not be flowery, and it may not be nice. Although I would encourage you generally to be kind to the individual going through addiction issues. We have an individual with us right now who's on a leave of absence from work. And they said, you're drunk. You can't keep coming to work drunk. Sorry, you got to go. And that was a form of an intervention. And it's probably not as complete as it could be. When family members, more than one of them, get together with an individual and say, this is how you're impacting me. This is what our lives look like. By the way, I don't know if you know what your life looks like, but this is what I'm seeing. And you do that with an individual, and you do it lovingly, and you do it with a door that's open to a resource. Because it's one thing to just simply point out that a person has a problem, but you also have to be ready to give them a resource, a place to go. It's like, okay, I've decided you're right. I have a problem. Now what? I don't know. That's not going to be a satisfactory answer. You're going to want to be able to point them in a direction, to a place, to a thing. I have my friend here who's sitting with us in this intervention. They'll take you to some meetings. We'll contact the treatment centers. We'll look at other different resources. So that would be the way in which you could do that. Boundaries. This one's tough because there's no one single answer for boundaries. For those of you who have an addict in your life that has walked roughly over your housing, over your money, over different situations and violated boundaries within your home, it's never a simple or one-size-fits-all kind of set of decisions to make. People struggle with this all the time. If I tell a person they can't live with me, where are they going to live and what's their life going to look like when they don't live with us? And there's that fear, and there's a variety of different issues that take place. But it is important for a couple things to happen. It's important that you yourself don't enable the addict by giving them cover for their behavior and or resources so that they can continue on in their addiction. And it's also important that you protect yourself. Addicts, when they get involved in their behavior, are not as concerned as they could be, and sometimes not concerned at all with how other people end up on the other side. You know, we went through that DSM-5 list of different ways in which addiction shows up in people's lives and those questions that are answered. I swear to goodness, we could spend another hour going over each one, different examples of what that really looks like, and it is really rough, the way in which addicts behave, and unfortunately, the collateral damage is the people that care about them. And so I would just say that for having boundaries, there's the boundaries to protect the individual who's going through addiction, and there's the boundaries to protect the person yourself. Now, it's possible that somebody will talk to you about an addiction issue that they have, and it's really easy to experience and express the frustration you've been feeling. Because if you put up with somebody for a while, there's probably going to be some frustration, maybe some pain or otherwise. But if a person's willing to be confidential with you, I would urge you to be kind, to be willing to, first of all, hold them in confidentiality, to listen, to establish trust, and to be empathetic. Once again, you're not giving away your boundaries in doing these things, but we call this all a grace-based acceptance. But basically not enhancing the shame of the individual, but a realization that there is a real problem present and that there are ways to get through it and that you care about them. And I would say that that's the things that we can do the most that would help an individual. So, at any rate, here were some resources that we added to your packets. Let me just take a quick look. They're also a little small in the font, but I'm pretty sure most of you know how to do a Google search. So Amanda is somebody who leads our Celebrate Recovery at this facility. There is, I believe, Thursday nights. What time is that at? 6:30 Thursday nights. Show up here. There's support and people who will join you. And so her number's listed there. Alcoholics Anonymous, it's easy. You can see aasandiego.org. Narcotics Anonymous is sandiegoNA.org. Teen Challenge is a national organization. And so once you find the national organization, it can bring you down to more the state level. And I added one, which is a newer app. It's called Newform. It's newform.org. And they feature a bunch of different types of groups. Smart Recovery, Ben's Friends. Ben's Friends is a unique one. It's for people in the food and beverage industry, regardless of substance, because it apparently is quite hard to work in a kitchen and not be exposed to drug or alcohol use. But also they're really pretty commonly making available things like, those go on a hike, go play volleyball, go on a bike ride, sort of events that take place. And so that's a resource for individuals who are finding that or fearing that sobriety is going to be boring. And lastly, I added this one. It's a YouTube video. It's Nicole Labor, the Neurobiology of Addiction. It's Addiction 101. If you take a look at it, I'll tell you what, I tell people in treatment all the time, if I only had you for a half hour and you were going to head out the door, this is what I would show you. And it just really details, probably in far better terms than what I've given you today, the nature of the disease of addiction, what needs to be done about it, what causes relapse, and so forth. So I believe that's it.